Good afternoon from Tokyo. We are currently at a poster session at the Asian Conference on Education and International Development, which is jointly held alongside the Asian Conference on Psychology and Gerontology. Next to me are standing two plenary panelists from the psychology part of the conference, Dr. Beth Hedva from the Canadian Institute for Transpersonal and Integrative Sciences in Canada, and Professor Dharmawan Purnama from the Krida Wacana Christian University in Indonesia. Thank you so much for being here. Could you briefly introduce yourselves and tell us what you do?
So my specialty is integrating in ancient and indigenous spiritual healing traditions together with the more conventional evidence-based psychological practices, and particularly honoring as opposed to appropriating those particular practices. Also, I've had the opportunity to work with cultures around the world, and especially in the two most disastrous natural disasters, the most dangerous natural disasters with the highest death rates, along with working with communities who have been dealing with humanitarian disasters as well. And as many of us know, those often happen in the areas around the Ring of Fire, and those are cultures predominantly in a lower economic status. And so it's very important when we're working with other cultures to honor the culture that we're working with, and to recognize that there are many psychologies, not just Western psychology. So that's my area of specialization, is trauma recovery and using deep inner healing resources to train ourselves, to train others, to train our communities, and to build a new relationship to the earth itself.
I'm a psychiatrist and I have a background, PhD in existential philosophy. My main interest in Indonesia usually interventional psychiatry by giving the stimulations to the brains, and I usually work with special needs children's, ADHD, autism, and the other is the psychosexual and maritals. So I work with the marital problems, the family problems, but in Indonesia, usually I practicing for a patient with the ADHD, for patient, or maybe I accept the referrals for the brain stimulations. I'm also the lecturer in the Krida Wacana University, especially for the subject anxiety, depression, brain stimulations, and psychosexual.
You were both plenary panelists on a panel that was looking at the psychological opportunities but also challenges of introducing artificial intelligence to our everyday lives. Can you talk a little bit about what the main key takeaways were of that panel?
So speaking for myself and what it is that we at the Canadian Institute were bringing forward is to really understand the distinction between human intelligence and artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is based on accelerated computation, accelerated interactivity. Even if it's generative, even if it can be self-programming, it's not generating new ideas, it's not generating creative possibilities, it's not creating connection with transcendent awareness that can inspire us and give us insight and meaning into our lives and into how to be present in the world that's dealing with accelerated change like climate crisis, economic crisis, and then of course all of the usual crises that we face in our families and in our interpersonal relationships. So what AI can do and what's distinct about it is how can we use it as the amazing digital tool that it is that can do really fast computations. That's really useful for diagnosis, for example, and assessment. We use it in many different venues, from social media to language apps. You know, I won't go into a list of all of the ways it's infiltrated every part of our lives. But we also need to be very cautious about how, especially OpenAI, is geared towards gathering information about us for its own purposes. to train itself in our habits, in our language, so it can create algorithms that it can then sell to third parties for advertising purposes and for political messaging. So those were some of the concerns that I brought up. There's more, of course, but I think I'll pause there and let my colleague talk a little bit about more of the psychophysical and neurological aspects, which are another really important element to be sensitive to as psychologists and also as psychiatrists.
I talk about the impact of the usage of AI to the neurobiology of the brain. So I find many problems now because usually human intelligence should be shaped by the experience learning process for us, because we have already grown up and have a foundation of the education, the learning process. AI can be a good tools to help our duty, our tasks, our projects to help. But the genuinity, authenticity should come from our original mind, not from the AI. But now is the era when the children, since the beginning, they are not learning by themselves, but just copy what AI tell them. Now, many people come with anxiety, depressions because of the impact of the AI. They feel insecure, they compare too much, they loss of a meaning of life, a purpose of life, the direction, how to direct their life. It is not only phenomenology by the symptoms, it is will impact, change our brain. So like addiction to AI, to gadget, behavioral addictions, because it's impact to our brain reward system, the nucleus accumbens, ventral tegmentum area, and then the limbic systems, and then the others, the amygdala, and then they easy to feel anxious. The frontal lobes for the executive functioning, the motivations, the planning, the inhibitions. So now they change our brains, difficult to inhibit our emotion, our behaviors, and lack of critical thinking, because just copy and copy. So it is just like systematic, led by the algorithm. But human intelligence, I think not like that, not enough. That's my focus.
Are there any, well, I guess you mentioned that young people, but are there any other demographics or vulnerable groups that are more affected by this than others?
Actually, there is the negative effects. What we concern about the child development and how they learn. But actually, I believe there will be a positive impact. For example, maybe we can use AI to stimulate the old people, the geriatric populations, to prevent their development of dementia, maybe prevent the mild cognitive impairment, because they learn how to use the new invention of the AI, the technology. So we should be wise here to use the technology, use the AI. So not only the negative impact, but if we can use for the positive impact, we should more focus on that.
A hidden group is anybody who is employed right now there is the anticipation, according to Goldman Sachs, 300 million workers worldwide will be eliminated or replaced by AI. And we're already noticing that now. Autonomous cars will replace Uber drivers and taxi cabs. Although that does have a positive because people who are disabled can finally, get around town, and that's really nice. But also health professionals and lawyers and medical professionals, people who think that they're immune to being replaced. That is not necessarily the case. We're already seeing AI diagnosing and providing therapy and writing assessments and treatment plans. And already it's used in medicine extensively, not just for space exploration, that's some of the positive stuff too, but it also is replacing people who are going to be in economic crisis if their jobs go away. So it's an existential crisis that is looming right now, threatening workers' economic security, sense of identity, sense of agency and control from the inside out instead of from the outside in, and also that sense of life purpose. So finding a way to reconnect with ourselves in an essential way and discover what is our life really about and what is it that has meaning and purpose to me. And if my job goes away, how do I create meaning today? That's going to be one of the big issues that we're going to be facing.
Building on that, and I guess this is more a question towards you, AI is predominantly built on Western thought and knowledge, which includes the Western healthcare model. And what you described is a little bit unorthodox considering the Western healthcare model. So you're going more into indigenous practices, and these communities have practiced these things for millennia even, and they're very sustainable practices. Do these types of knowledge have any space within healthcare and within using AI for psychological?
Well, I think we're looking at some cultures that have done a really good job on retaining the indigenous wisdom. We see India, we see China, for example. Also in the First Nations, the integration of AI without losing the indigenous practices. What I have found in my work around the world is that many of the ancient cultures, from West Africa to the Americas to India, China, and the Jewish tradition, the Kabbalah, there are 5 distinct, if you were in the Jewish tradition, we call it worlds. In the Hindu and Chinese, we call it elements. So how do we reintegrate all of those elements of what it is to be human? And this is something that I also spoke about. How do we connect energetically to something greater than ourselves? And universally, the concept of the breath, that there's a spiritual energy in the breath that we can use to calm and soothe ourselves in times of stress. And this is now being validated in the West. We call it breath work. But, it's not real in the West until we validate it ourselves. So I think what we're going to be finding over time is the things that are so important and have been carried forward through the wisdom traditions around the world will become validated in the West. The next one is that capacity to observe our reactions, to have mindful awareness about that. In psychology and psychiatry, we call that assessment and evaluation. In a classroom, we call it the content that the students are learning today. The next, that's an important element that we find in every culture, is about emotional healing and the feeling of connection and storytelling cultures that are able transmitting wisdom and connection and a sense of community and healing that heals the sense of isolation, which is one of the biggest issues, especially with AI. We become so focused between me and my chat, and we forget that there are other people around. So another element that's beyond that is another piece that we need to integrate in, that I'm sure we will have finally more confirmation in years to come, is the power and purpose of intuition, creativity, and what I'm calling embodied awareness, that capacity to receive inner guidance, to use our energetic experiences that give us insight into ourselves and what it is we need, and insight as well as inner guidance on how we might go about taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other and our planet. And then, of course, that next step is like none of that is worth anything unless you activate it and embody it and take it out into the world. To be able to be a model of self-care, be an example of what it is that you've learned from the inside out, and then to be able to extend care to others, leading by example, and then to be able to extend care to our communities and to extend care to the earth itself, because our earth is crying out for us to recognize that we're not separate from the earth right now. So that's a big mouthful, but that's what, when we're looking at the Indigenous teachings, they all speak to that in one form or another.
Do you also use any Indigenous methods in your...
Yeah, I use the mindfulness, and actually Indonesia is also a spiritual country. In my experience, the most important thing between therapist or doctor and the patient and the clients is not about the theory that the AI can show to us, but connections. So I think more than 50% or maybe 70%, the therapeutic effect is about our connections. Because many therapists, many doctors can give the same medicines, but the results different. For example, how we should make research double-blind placebo control. So that is the very important of the human connections. So we make a double-blind. So we eliminate the human connections that can be therapeutic effects. It cannot be replaced in humans relations as therapists, as doctors. So I think AI cannot replace it as perfect as what we can show our patients, our sincere to the client or to the patients, or even if you sell something, the salesman will influence you to buy or not. That's not only the theories come out from the AI.
Are there any primal human instincts that may vanish if we completely rely on AI? So would that completely change our human identity?
So first of all, when you're talking about primal human instincts, as long as we have a body, a physical body, we're going to have physical reactions. It's instinctive. If I hear a loud sound, I'm going to jump. So when we're talking about primal instincts, that's going to be there as long as we're physically here. How we respond to that reaction, now that's another story. And that takes training. So do we respond with territoriality, which is brainstem instinctive reaction? Is that going to change? Right now we're seeing it increasing, despite AI giving us this kind of distant perspective. So then there's also the question of limbic connection and our desire for attachment and to feel affiliation with people. And that has both pros and cons. I don't think that's going to go away. I think we're hungry for connection, genuine connection, someone who knows us, who can see us, who can embrace us just as we are without judging us. Now, I have noticed that AI therapists are good at that because they don't react to you, unlike sometimes a regular therapist has their own countertransference where they have their own stuff come up. So it's about how do we learn to work with our own material. It could be that maybe AI will help us develop a greater capacity if we can program it to do this so that we can become more conscious of our reactions and then be able to mediate those with a greater, higher intelligence within our own being, to be able to, as the spiritual tradition suggests, surrender certain elements of our animal nature, the affiliation that comes with attachment. The Buddhists are really big on this, attachments and aversions, right? So can we recognize those instinctive reactions? Will we ever be free of them? Well, I think that's called enlightenment. And I pray and hope that each of us as human beings are on a path of awakening not just that capacity to really perceive the beauty and grace of life and the universe, but that we can actually embody it and demonstrate it in our interactions with each other. So I'd love to see AI be developed as a tool to help us be able to do that.
We believe every human is unique. So how AI can be programmed as much as human's unicity? So that is the instincts, the expression of the feelings. I think it is difficult to program because too much variation. But for knowledge, only for knowledge, based on the research paper published, etc., maybe we can program the AI, and we can teach the AI. And sometimes I think teaching the AI easier than teaching humans. Because when I teach humans, when they receive the knowledge, but they can have a resistance, they can have a denial, defensiveness, and not easy to change. But AI, easy to change. Depends on how we program, how we ask them to learn and change. So that's the thing that we should aware and careful.
Well, I guess there's a lot of responsibility on the developers of AI and on the educators and on the parents and everybody.
Yes, and you're speaking about the developers, and I think that this is a really important question because right now it kind of reminds me of when the internet first came out and everybody was coming out with a way of doing really exciting things and it was all open and now it's like owned by a few corporations essentially. So I think what we really are needing to look at is an ethical shift from monetization and mercantile motivation to humanistic and humanitarian motives. And how do we make that as the baseline for any development that goes on with AI instead of how can we make money off of it? And unfortunately, with our very materialistic Western culture, that's a very Western model. In the indigenous cultures in the Americas, that is not the top priority. Money is not the top priority at all. The top priority is relational. The top priority is starting with our primary relationship with, as they say, our mother, which is the earth. And as we have a good relationship with our mother, we can have a pretty good relationship with each other. So, there's some big shift that needs to be happening that can allow us to be in relationship to each other in a new way that allows for the space for the unique individual that we each are. And then how do we come together in community to support humanity and humanitarian values? And how do we program that into AI? So that's a test I put to the developers.
Oh, wow. That's hopefully they're up to the task.
I think it can be done.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Very insightful presentation and interview also. Thank you so much.
Thank you.